Chapter 1, Introduction to Medical Language. Chapter 1 is probably the most important chapter in this course, really. And that's because this is where you get the groundwork, where you get the um, main points of how terms are created and what their parts are, as well as to um, explain how you interpret those. So we'll be able to take words apart, put words together, and know what they mean. It'll also help with some spelling of terms as well. So this is a key chapter in this material. In lesson 1 of this chapter, we'll describe origins of medical language, and we'll look at the two categories of medical terms. We'll identify and define the four word parts and combining forms that we use in putting terms together and in taking them apart. We'll analyze and define medical terms using the meanings of the particular word parts, and we'll build medical terms using the meanings of the word parts. The formal definition of what is medical terminology is it's a specialized vocabulary used for communicating among healthcare professionals. So this is the language of healthcare that we use as healthcare professionals, as those people who are working in healthcare, communicating with each other mainly. This is the language that we would use to do that. When we look at origins of the medical language, and this is simply where did it begin and how did it begin? A lot of these terms come from a Greek or Latin base, and that's not as difficult as you might think because a lot of our common, ordinary, everyday language may actually come from those bases as well. So terms that we know outside of healthcare, and it also is a base even for some other languages as well. So it kind of makes sense that this would be a good origin for terms. Then we have eponyms. These are typically from a person's name or a place. Now, um, Nile virus might be one that we would look at there. That not because it may be from, in this case, it may be where it was first discovered or identified or that kind of thing. But it also may be from someone who identified a particular disease or uh, such as Alzheimer's disease. And it might also be someone who maybe designed a certain instrument or those kind of things. So it's giving that person, the prominence of their discovery, really. But that would be an eponym. And then an acronym is formed from the first letter of each word. And these quite often are three or more words that we just simply take the first letter off of each one and create the acronym. A simple one that we might look at there would be MRI, which most people know that know about MRIs. But what does it stand for? Well, it is magnetic resonance imaging. So the first letter of each word is used to create the acronym. Um, and then we have those that are coming from modern language. They really don't have a a time or a name indicator for those. They are simply words that are created from things that we currently see. And sometimes that might be a certain test or maybe laboratory or imaging type test. So these are words that simply are just words that we have created now that have no connection to any other of these types of development. In this material, we'll look at essentially two different categories of terms. We'll look at those that are built from word parts, which would be things that you may will take the main term and then we may take another word part such as a suffix or prefix, put those together and create the term. So those are directly built from those word parts. We also will look at terms that are not built from word parts, and these may be the ones that are a little more difficult for you to get down because we don't necessarily have an association to what that a particular part means to help us out. Sometimes you can get an indicator, a clue, but not always. So a lot of times these are terms you simply have to learn them as they are, and you may have to write them out or whatever, however helps you to memorize the terms. But fortunately, uh, a large majority of the terms probably are built from word parts, but there, you may find some, and we'll find some in this course that are not. Looking specifically at terms that are built from word parts, we have essentially four different parts that we look at here. We look at the word root, which is going to give us the fundamental or the basic meaning of this particular term. It is the main part of the term. We also have the suffixes, which will come at the end of the word root. It's going to help us to um, modify the meaning of the term, give us a little bit more information about what it applies to, and then we have prefixes, which would come at the beginning of a word root, and that's going to also again modify the term. So between the three parts, we get the modifications of what the main term is going to mean. In addition, we have a combining vowel, and the really main purpose of a combining vowel is simply to help us in pronouncing it. There's a lot of terms if you put together just two word parts, or you put together a word part and a prefix, suffix, or all three of those, trying to pronounce those would be a little bit difficult. So in most cases, it's an O, the letter O, that we put in there as a combining vowel, but its main purpose is just to help us in the pronunciation of the terms. And as we look at each of the word parts, as we mentioned earlier, a word root is the fundamental meaning of the medical term. So that's going to tell us what it's primarily about. The suffix is going to be attached to the end of the term to modify the meaning of the word root itself. And as we look at each of the word parts, as we mentioned earlier, a word root is the fundamental meaning of the medical term. So that's going to tell us what it's primarily about. The suffix is going to be attached to the end of the term to modify the meaning of the word root itself. The prefix is attached at the beginning, and it's going to also modify and further define the actual main term. And then the combining vowel is going to be used to help us in pronunciation. And again, usually that is a O. When you're connecting a word root and a suffix, a combining vowel is used if the suffix does not begin with a vowel. If it already has a vowel, you're probably not going to add one there, in other words. When you're connecting a word root and a suffix, um, it is not used, a vowel is not used when a suffix already begins with one. So those are your cues. For instance, if the suffix begins with an O, you would not add another O to that, mainly because you don't need it, because the rule is these are used primarily for pronunciation assistance anyway. However, a time when it's different is when you're using two word roots together. In that case, we do usually use a combining vowel. When you're connecting a prefix and a word root, you typically do not use a vowel in that case. A combining vowel is when a word root is combined with a vowel. So in this case, the example is Arthur is means joint, and the O after it would make that combining form arthro, which is much easier to say. And you'll hear me do this throughout the course when I'm going over some of the terms, because it's very difficult to use just the actual word root sometimes and pronounce it well. And so adding in the vowel, make it a combining form, is easier to pronounce. So keep that in mind as we go through the course as well.